Hello there, Dr. Malekebu. It's me, Dr. Jones. People, this I have been looking all over for you. I have these, that Sister Tawara gave me, the Zikum, I'm so sorry. Yes, Zitambua, the yummy, wonderful banana dough balls. The plate is actually right here. I just can't eat these all on my own, and I've been meaning to invite you and Mrs. Malekebu, Flora, over to my house. I have prepared the appropriate fellowship of President Malawi and Venezuela, and I just can't express to you how excited I would be. So honored to have you. I know you're sitting here very comfortably, but is there a reason the other medical professionals seem to stiffen up when you're around sometimes? I think it's been so wonderful for you to come and help us out at Livingstonia from PIM. But when I mentioned PIM, there's like this big hush-hush. We should talk about it privately in the church. Or I think your wife is in there preparing some things. That would be perfect. A picture. No, I can't say I'm familiar with her. Let me look. Let me look over here on the side. Better in this light. I can't say that I know her for sure. Let's see. Well, I'm so confused, Dr. Malekebu. I'm going to have a seat here, and I hope you will have a seat as well, and perhaps demystify some of what's going on. And I'm sorry, I'm so in a tizzy today. It's been quite interesting getting accustomed to working here at the mission with all the Scottish people, and being American. That's been a different culture shock, and then being here in Yasa land has been a bit of a change. And it's been so lovely, you and Miss Flora teaching, and I have appreciated very much that you came all the way from PIM to do a little bit of help here while they're short-staffed. So I personally have very much appreciated getting to know you and your wife. Miss Flora is amazing. I understand she grew up in the United States. Yes. I'm very confused. You have me feeling all conspiratorial, Doctor. I've got my eye here on my wonderful Zitumbua because I'm getting a little hungry, but I'll just keep them there, and then I don't want to knock them over by accident. I am quite klutzy sometimes. I've also been meaning to come to you about my back. Yes, that you examined recently. Absolutely. Well, I suppose this would be a good time for a back exam, actually. Thank you. I'm so confused by all of this. So it is good to get it out of the way. And then you'll answer my questions, right? Good. Thank you for listening to my lungs. I'm sorry I shouldn't talk during the exam. Thank you. What do you think? Good. And the spine. I see. Well, I appreciate you interrupting our conversation to make sure that we don't forget this. Thank you. You are very kind, Doctor. Oh, it's your wife. Hi there, Sister Flo. Oh, she's busy. All right. I guess I shouldn't interrupt her then. But so, what is going on? Why is it people are uncomfortable talking about PIM? And I guess I was assuming it was some British or Scottish politics. Being an American, I'm woefully ignorant. I understand it was a little bit of a challenge. Your trip back to Nyasaland recently. What is going on? It is your own country. I don't understand. Oh, yes, I know who he is. I just don't know the woman in the picture. I see. I almost feel like I should take notes. Let's see, there should be something here I can put underneath my book. This piece of paper on top of it, and I can take notes if necessary. Yes. So, the mystery. So this place, so Nyasaland is not a correct name for this area. It really should be called Malawi. Who were the Malawi? A kingdom stretching over this area. What happened to them? Oh. I understand there's 3 people groups in this area. People who are descended from the Yao, and people who are descended from the Chilembwe, but not many descended from the Malawi. So Arab Islamists and Yao converts to Islam essentially overthrew or destabilized Malawi by kidnapping them and selling them to slavery. Oh, I see. That's the slave trade in the late 1800s that Dr. Livingstone was working on in this area that he was opposing. Correct. That gentleman. You have mixed feelings about that picture. I'm here to listen. So the Arabs and the Yao began attacking the Malawi and were selling them all the way down in Zanzibar. Alright. Oh, and you are Yao. So after the other people groups were thinned out, this area now in the 1900s is predominantly Yao. I see. Now, so it is 1927 now, and this area is almost completely Yao, you were saying. I see. I should remember these words. How do you spell that? I'm so sorry. So I'm familiar with that particular slave trade because I read the publication of Dr. Livingstone's diary in the 1872 paper. Oh, you have a friend who read the original before that was published. Oh my. Yes, I should be writing this down. So let me get this straight. Oh my goodness. Oh my. So, so he was forced by necessity to travel with Arab traders. And then the very people he'd been railing against. Oh my goodness. He even writes he found them very kind, they treated him well. He was going to starve if he wasn't with them, so he went with them. But then obviously the local people stopped liking him because they didn't trust these traders. Alright. So oh my goodness. So Dr. Livingstone, I can't understand that of him. This is the same man who performed one of the continent's first appendectomies to save the life of a chieftain's daughter, of whom Africans have said a white man who treated black men as his brothers. And he did what? So he began to become violent like the people he despised, and even sent men to threaten a local leader with flogging if he didn't help him survive. I mean, I understand that he's trying to survive, but that's no... And his whole life he'd been speaking against violence and colonialism. I understand he had some racial ideas, but his ideas were that that freedom was the best way to support all races. So this surprises me greatly. How horrid. But the story doesn't end there. Oh well, good, because that's a horrible place. That's a horrible thing to find out about the man. This center is named after him. So then he had a wake-up call, a horrible wake-up call, when he saw the Arab traders kill over 400 people, mostly women. Oh my goodness. So it was the most... Oh my. And he'd seen many horrible things already by that point, so to feel like, to be so astonished and terrified, I mean, of course it must have been horrible, large scale, evil like that. It's just, I suppose I've been told even Lincoln had his failings and prejudiced writings, even though he did a lot of good. But oh my, it's still shocking to find out that someone like Livingstone would have dabbled with the darkness. I see. But it's after he sees this horrible thing that he succeeds in ending the slave trade in Zanzibar. Do tell why. For after this, he's found by Stanley from the Herald, the American newspaper. And then he goes to Britain. Well, he doesn't go to Britain, but the news reaches Britain. I remember that. And then the British public becomes so angry at the things that he describes that the British Empire is forced to shut down the slave markets. Well, because of course slavery had ended officially in Britain itself many years before. Yes. Long before the American Civil War, actually, I understand. I have a number of British friends who brag about this. But throughout the British Empire, it didn't matter outside of Britain so much, so even in their own territories they didn't try to stop things. But the empire responded aggressively, shut down the markets in Zanzibar, and tightened its hold here on Yasa land as well. I see. So, what shocking information. So it's after he becomes so close to evil that it taints him, that he becomes more resolved than ever to destroy it, because he realizes how pervasive and awful it is. This is certainly a little-known secret. I suppose he would want people to know, though, and know that even people who seem to be kind or upstanding must be judged by how they treat people who are powerless before them. But Doctor, I don't understand what this has to do with the picture you showed me, or PIM, or anything. Are you saying that no good person is truly good, or that sometimes evil things result in good? I don't quite understand, Doctor. The Chilembwe uprising. Now, no one will tell me what happened there. I've heard that this Chilembwe is somebody's head, but I don't know. I see. So, Chilembwe closely identified with both the Lomwe tenants working on the Macomero cotton estates of Alexander L. Bruce, who were experiencing the Thangata system of labor rent. The Thangata system of labor rent. Let me just check over here. I want to see if I can get your wife's attention. Oh no, it seems she's still busy. What is Thangata, Doctor? So, originally, it's essentially a form of legal slavery in the British Empire. What do you mean by that, Doctor? I can't wave her down. She is quite busy. I really want to invite you both over. So tell me about Thangata, because slavery is illegal throughout the British Empire. All right. So it originally comes from the principle of you helping your neighbor. It's a term of working for free in your neighbor's yard, essentially. But with the British, it means helping for free in the yard of the British person who is controlling the land where your ancestors lived without being paid, in exchange for being allowed to live on the land that your ancestors... I see. So technically, the government here sees it as an exchange, or saw it as an exchange of goods or services, because people are in there renting, essentially, and then they're renting by working. But you're renting the land that was originally yours and your parents'. Oh my. And you're working for free. It's a system that is very open to corruption. If it really were, if you had a perfect so it wasn't unheard of for large tribal leaders to have people work in exchange for other things. Obviously, people exchange work for things, but I can see where this could be. I see. What did John Chilembwe say? So, who was he? I see. He felt that the Christian notions of individualism and owning one's own labor and land conflicted with the British reliance on chiefs' traditional prerogatives of appropriating unpaid tributary labor. Oh. Yes, because historically, as you said, chieftains could make you do that, and twist Thangata, and then the British did the same thing. I see. It sounds like you knew this Mr. Chilembwe. You used to hear him pray. Oh my goodness. Those are beautiful words. These poor downtrodden brethren might speedily enjoy the privileges of true and real Christian civilization. And what he means is freedom, essentially. I can see... And he writes of having a troubled heart for the death of his pupils, who had been enlisted to serve in the British fringe, the forced conscription, during the Great War. I see. Oh, and he describes the oh my goodness, the weeping parents. Wars and taxation without representation. I'm very familiar with those terms. That's why we had a revolution against the British Empire in 1776. So are you saying he was essentially a revolutionary? So this wasn't a rebellion or an uprising. So he sounds very religious, obviously. He is asking God to prepare for an ingathering of souls for his harvest in Africa. And he believes freedom is necessary for his evangelism. That makes sense. And for him, the extension of Christianity implies liberation, spiritual and political. All right. So, I'm beginning to see some connections. I'm still very confused. Who is this woman? And where do you fit in and BIM? So Chilembwe wasn't a doctor. John Chilembwe was a pastor, and he was one of the founders of the BIM mission. Curiouser and curiouser. Lewis Jordan. I heard of Lewis Jordan. So 1904, he's the one he was criticized by the South African press because he had told black people they're made by the same God and the same material as white people. Yes, and it was not appreciated for that, to which he responded with dark irony, well, that seems to be the crime of crimes here. I remember that. I thought it was a clever exchange of his. So a lot of these characters, they know each other. This Jordan, he's not active here, but in a slightly different area, closer to South Africa. And then John Cheek. So John Cheek was also one of the BIM founders, I see. And he was a Black American. Alright, so Chilembwe is, like yourself, from Nyasaland. I see. And he was Lumwe, or the other workers were Lumwe, and you were Yao. I see. So he wasn't Lumwe. Okay. Or he was. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh. I didn't know that. John Cheek was frustrated with the forced labor of people being required to carry paperwork saying that they had done a month's work. Oh my goodness. People were working for about 72 cents a month. And even by standards of living here, that's nothing. What can people live on? So tell of one person in the Congo Free State, which isn't far from here, for 2 years to earn enough to send two boys to school at $30 per year. And, wow. So the cost of education is well beyond the reach of everybody, which is why the mission schools are educating everybody for free. And Chilembwe wrote, to be denied education was to be left, struggling in darkness and doubt. So Jordan also had similar complaints. He was open, though. John Chilembwe was not initially openly critical of the British, I see. He was trying to work within the confines and work peacefully to build BIM, even though he quietly was critical. But Jordan spoke openly about the British deporting people from where they lived to go work in the South African mines. Well, there's a reason some of us don't want to be controlled by Britain. So essentially, this is what you're talking to me about, is essentially economy controlled by the state versus economy controlled by the individual. The voluntary compulsion of caring for your neighbor forcefully in the hands of the state. Right. Which is different than, so that's involuntary compulsion, and the wealth goes upwards to the empire. I see. Versus he wanted individual property for everyone regardless of race. This is what Laws was talking about. Robert Laws, the gentleman who founded Livingstonia. It seems his wife had told me, he and his wife, they're leaving this year. They have worked here, obviously, in Livingstonia for a long time. I think they've helped establish over 700 schools, teaching things like medicine and industry. His wife told me that about 10 years ago, back in 1917, he was irritated and wrote politically because he had some political leverage about African soldiers just being dumped and not medically treated after the World War. I remember, and his wife told me that his exact words were that a question to the House of Commons about the subject would be an extremely awkward one for the local government to answer. Yes, because British people in Britain would not much like to hear about these things. They're very, after people like Wilberforce and Livingstone, they are, at least have their eyes somewhat open to the ideas of compassion for people who don't look like them. So, and especially the patriotism of the World War, people would be very angry that any soldiers in the British Empire were being mistreated, I see. So he was trying to leverage that for the protection of the African soldiers, I see. So, well, that's what he told me. That's what I was told. Anyway. So, not I see. I don't know why I'm saying I see. So all of this mess is happening in British-controlled Nyasaland. And John Chilembwe is seeing this. I see. I see. Well, meanwhile, in the United States, and I must confess, I don't know a lot about the Christian missionary movement in the United States. I took this post, well, we'll talk about it later, other charitable reasons, but so Black missionaries in the United States are beginning to foster concern about oppression in general. I see. And other places. So Chilembwe is educated by Joseph Booth, an Englishman and religious radical, a supporter of Ethiopianism, and a preacher of African for Africans. That doesn't sound very radical. If this is where you live, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit odd among my friends and so forth, which is one of the reasons that I'm here. You have to be a little bit odd to decide to move to a different country. It's just, this is very strange to me, some of these things. I remember Ethiopianism. So Ethiopia is the only country that has maintained its independence from Britain and the other countries, partly because they had a large empire there. My understanding is that the empire was actually the oldest Christian empire. Mm-hmm. Well, even in your New Testament, it talks about. I have read your New Testament. The Scottish missionaries are very pressing. They appreciate the help, any helping doctor hands they can, but yes, I have read the New Testament. There are mentions of Christians in Ethiopia long before any white person ever. Yes. So I'm aware of that. But then I'm aware that afterwards it became an Islamic empire because it was conquered. It used to be ruled by queens, then it was conquered in great part by Islam, is that correct? And then it was not ruled by queens anymore. So, Ethiopianism, essentially. So I understand what you're talking about when you mention Ethiopianism is essentially the idea of Black independence. How wonderfully scandalous. It really shouldn't be scandalous. It should be quite reasonable. So, he was first educated, John Chilembwe of PIM. It was something to do with why people are uncomfortable, although I'm beginning to guess why. He was educated by this Joseph Booth, and then he was educated at Virginia Theological Seminary and College of Lynchburg. There he meets this Jordan fellow, I see, who spoke out about the mining deportation. So essentially you have in Virginia this glorious hotbed of Black Christian rebellion and unity across very different cultures, which is not something that I, as a Northerner, associate with Virginia. Virginia is very much the South. Not generally considered. Oh, that lady was from the South. That lady was from Florida. Curiouser and curiouser. So, Chilembwe establishes the PIM mission with John Cheek to join it. I see. And even when Cheek has first arrived, there's an article about it, oh my goodness, in the Central African Journal. goodness, they're saying they're afraid he's an American black person who's come as a sort of emancipator of his people. And we learn that he has settled in that hornet's nest of Chiratsulu. That's the village nearby. I see. Ah, but then missionaries are trying to avoid these accusations, so that they write in the Mission Herald. Yes, because even by name, even if you don't believe in missions and so forth. I'm sorry, doctor, there's something on your shoulder there. Apologies. My apologies, doctor. Yes. In America, this is something that I know well. Even if you don't believe in missions, you don't believe actually in God, everyone calls themselves a Christian. Yes. Very important. It's a very important cultural phenomenon. So the Mission Herald is able to attack this Central African newspaper when it's attacking John Cheek, because the newspaper is saying, oh, John Cheek is a dangerous American black person who's going to try to emancipate the people. Oh no. And the missionaries answer and accuse the writer of being a rum dealer. What are the exact words? They accuse the writer of perhaps being a rum dealer or trader of some sort whose interest lay in denying Africans the gospel with its accompanying clarity. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, good for them. So these gentlemen are running the PIM mission. Not just gentlemen. He has a wife, Ida. Understand. And it's difficult from everywhere. They say they have opposition from heathen kings, the government, English, and even white missionaries. So, And this isn't very long ago. We're talking 1901, 1902. So, about 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago is long for you and I, or it's still quite young. Although I think you have some years on me, Doctor. This is fascinating. So, So, African evangelists were required to carry passes that proved that a white person had authorized them to evangelize. Again, there seems to be something just slightly on your... Do you mind, Doctor? I know that here, it's interesting here, physical contact is much less taboo, especially among the same gender. When, I must admit, when your wife first, when I first met your wife, I was taken aback at how much it has been very new being here and learning about physical contact from a different perspective. Americans are much more, a little bit more standoffish and distant. But even though she is American herself, yes, she is much friendlier than Americans on average. My understanding is she spent her childhood in the Congo, or part of it. I see. Well, you see some of that in the wonderful friendliness. And Sister Tawera is just, she's a hugger. She's right there, right next to you, all the time. And I love that. I really like that. So, it's wonderful stuff. Yes. And of course, doctors know no boundaries in many ways. Yes. It is, except those within the Hippocratic Oath. it is nice in many ways to be in a place where in some ways there's less scrutiny, in other ways there's much more scrutiny. Oh my goodness. It's challenging. I noticed that some of the women... Anyway, I want to hear more of your... Yes, so... So colonial governments did not want black people to be spreading the gospel or preaching too much. They wanted all preaching to come through the mouths of white people, and with the assumption that white people would keep things controlled. I see. All the laws. But I suppose Scottish people are a little bit rebellious compared to English people. It's something I've noticed. They don't like to be assumed to be the same as each other. Yes. Because Mr. Laws does emphasize so much the industrialization and making sure that when you preach the gospel, you are giving people practical ability to move forward and to be able to survive and compete and so forth. So I understand that. And so, and yes. So African people were even pressured to put white people at the head of churches that they had found. But was that a legal requirement? Not a legal requirement, but the evangelism passes were. Oh my goodness. It seems to me that white evangelists can't have it both ways. If they preach the gospel, your gospel, they must be prepared to deal with its consequences. Consequences such as people believing that they have worth if a God-man wants to die for them. And that they have a right to live and own property because everyone in all of scriptures owns property. Yes, I see. So you grew up there. You grew up in Chilembwe, didn't you? All right. So Chilembwe was your pastor. All right, Dr. Malekebu. What was it like growing up there? So Ida Chilembwe planted flowers, roses, and geraniums, and it was beautiful and safe. They dressed and behaved the way Chilembwe thought was European. It was just the turn of the century, after all. So their clothing would have been very warm indeed. Yes, a lot has changed in fashion in the last 20 years, for which I am thankful. I would not want to wear those very up to the neck clothes that even my mother had to wear. So he was very conservative, I see. And women wore European clothes and head coverings, I see. Oh, Miss Flora, thank you for joining us. So Ida's conservative dress didn't mean she was a repressed woman. She traveled on her own to neighboring villages to preach to women to find equality with their husbands and abandon early marriage from puberty. How delightfully scandalous. So she was pragmatic. The idea that a woman, if she was truly meant, I see. So she interpreted that passage about a woman being a helpmeet to man as meaning she must be equal, because you can't possibly have a suitable helpmeet who is uneducated, poor, unable to manage her own finances. Yes, in order to be a helpmeet, she must be equal in every way before God. I see, not a slave. I will say that I don't think that's a belief that is very common among at least white American Christians, having known my share of them. So very, very interesting. So, Ida Chilembwe, this young woman in her 20s, going out into these dangerous villages, risking leopards. Oh my goodness. They're not as dangerous nowadays. I see. But back then they were fighting them off regularly. Oh, you remember John Chilembwe? Oh, they would say in the South, bless his heart, but I think they would be condescending. I truly mean it. How sweet of him to be so frustrated when he was sick and worried about his wife and not being able to fight off the leopards. Oh, how stressful. And he always called her his little wife. Saw her so brave and wonderful. What a lovely couple. Oh. How did you come to be there with these people at the mission? Because you weren't born into that, not with your age. And this, now we come to Miss Delaney. Oh, Flora, before you go, I know you're very busy, but I really wanted to thank you both. Would you be able to come to my place? Or when could you come to my place? I would love to invite you both for dinner. You especially, of course. It's been quite wonderful getting to know you, and I know you'll be going back to PIM soon. I know you're just here for a brief visit, and well, you see, well, I am trying my hand at cooking a little more, well, Nyasaland style, I guess Malawi style. I'm not sure whose style it is, I'm not sure what words I'm supposed to use, but I do know this word, takulandirani. You would be very welcome. I would be so honored. Thank you. I'm sorry to hold you up. I love your wife. She's very beautiful as well. You are a very fortunate man. So, you and Miss Delaney. So the woman in the picture is Miss Delaney. I see. Alright. So she is the one who came to your village and invited you to be educated. You have a sister. I see. And because your parents were poor, they allowed the sister to go so that she would work begrudgingly. I see. So they could have money. I think that's lovely that you adored learning letters. There are many American children who do not. So they could learn a thing or two. I was also very excited when I could learn to write. Oh my goodness. So you both... Wow. So Mrs. Delaney was very kind to you. There was sewing, there was singing, there was reading, there was talking about opportunities and what you could be. So essentially, this black woman from Florida taught you, a young man from the Yao people group in Nyasaland, how to dream, and your sister too. So you naturally followed her religion. How did your parents take that? I know that I just have personal experience knowing that many parents would be very angry with their children becoming Christian. Many parents of many belief systems, even in Europe and the United States. Just saying from personal. Yes, very specific, small belief systems. Obviously the minority in Europe and the United States. Yes. Well, we'll talk about me later. mother and father came up the day you were going to be baptized and were exceptionally angry. Well, I understand why they might be angry. Oh my. So you can have the boy. That's what your parents said. But not the girl. That's strange. Because she hadn't been. I didn't know they do that to girls. So they wanted her to go through this ritual, essentially of mutilation, on her downstairs. And she was also supposed to be married to a 45-year-old, and she was 8. Ah. I see. I think that is why practices like that are why it is sometimes difficult to convince colonial governments that they're in the wrong and that peaceful missions, like what Robert Laws wants to do, although I know he's become involved with the colonial government, my understanding is he is trying to advocate for good treatment, but still, many people believe they can fix the world by force, and it's difficult, the idea of fixing the world by preaching. On the other hand, I think I would certainly want to use force to protect a little girl, especially if she did not want that and she wanted to be baptized, whether or not I was of the faith of her baptism. Well, perhaps not. Well, perhaps yes, but it's so... So Miss Delaney comes in peace and does not come with a gun. I have heard of missionary women who, in order to protect young girls from violation, would kidnap them away from the temples so that they would be safe. And I think in some cases that's justified. But that's not the same thing as taking over someone's country, right? It's a little complicated. We have had recently our own imperialists. There is movement, obviously movement for the Philippines, movement towards the South, with an eye towards South America, Puerto Rico, these kind of places. So it's not like imperialism is foreign to Americans, but at the same time there is a very strong, when it comes to the British in East Asia, for example, there are many Americans who are very against Britain in East Asia. I even saw a little cartoon of Uncle Sam standing and protecting East Asia from being cut up the way that Africa was cut up by Britain and the other European powers. So we think a little bit differently in the United States than they do in Europe. And the imperialists that we do have not been largely successful because of that. We very much like to do our own thing, and we are a bit individualistic. We are very patriotic, though. Maybe perhaps not as patriotic as the British, but that's hard to tell. I see. So, Miss Delaney, the American, comes and is trying, and now you're going to be baptized. Your little sister doesn't want to go back. You don't want to go back. You didn't want to be circumcised either. I see. It meant nothing to you, you said. I can see how that would offend your parents very much. If my brother told his parents he didn't want to be circumcised, he can't do anything about it, of course, because ours happens on the 8th day of life. But if he did, they would not be pleased. So I understand that. But on the other hand, I was very much a flapper in the early part of the 20s. Freedom is very important to me. And the little children, So, neither of you wanted to go back with your parents. You didn't like the way you were being treated. Oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Not very kind parents all the time. And your mother told you that if you were baptized, they would stop feeding you. Oh my. Could the mission feed you? There was no food. Oh my goodness. Miss Delaney used to give you some salt to be able to buy some food, and then would be unhappy when her salt ran out and she didn't have more to help you buy food. So your mother said they weren't going to feed you, and your sister said, then God will provide for me. That is heartbreaking. So, all right. And you were eating rats. I'm so sorry. You were happy. And thanked God for the rats. Oh my goodness. How can you be happy? You and your sister are extraordinarily interesting people, Dr. Malekebu. And then you wanted to study in America, and then Miss Delaney was forced to leave and couldn't bring you both with her. Didn't have anybody for passage. Oh my goodness. But in the time leading up to that, you were happy. It does sound like she taught you anti-colonialism in some ways, especially with this prayer you just mentioned. What did you say? You said she was entreating God to send more of Africa's children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren to help save their people from Satan and the cruel mercy of other nations. So, the two evils, as she sees it then, were colonialism and heathenism. I see. And she wanted more black missionaries. So when she says Africans dwell in the land of the shadow of death, it has two meanings. I see. She does seem... Americans are like that. We do tend to think that America is the best in some ways. So she's a little bit... But I understand. You also liked America. From what she told you. I don't know if I agree with that statement, but it's certainly an interesting one. Asia contributed the metaphorical brain to mankind, Europe the hand by work, and therefore Africa would become the heart of humanity. I'm not sure I see the human race as all areas waiting their turn to some higher evolution, but it could be. So that was from one of the mission magazines that she would read. I see. I have noticed that the ideas of Africa and the US don't really match. So just from the few months that I've been here, some yes, some no. Some of the frightening things are true. Some of the animals and diseases and abuses. But on the other hand, there's a lot that's not true. I think there's also this. We have this pure environment belief. And I think it's part of why people believe that, like, African people don't need to, will always be lower, which is so wrong. I think, and I must confess, I've known people with that. It's not an impossibly uncommon thought where I grew up. And they think that because they think that this is some pure, untouched wild with this noble, savage people. It's which there have been civilizations here long before. Yes, there are many people groups that have some really awful practices for women. This is very true. So that does exist, but there are some awful practices we have had ourselves in the United States, especially during the time of slavery, which ended only very recently. So, I do see a right and wrong. I may not be one of the Scottish missionaries, but I do see a right and wrong, and that, yes, and perhaps I'm very American in this way, I do believe in stopping wrong when I can, but I'm not European. I do not want to take over other people's place. I think we're on an individual level. Like if individuals will stop people from hurting each other, not governments. But so I think maybe we see what we want to see, or we see what we believe is possible, right? There's this movement called social Darwinism that is picking up. I'm a little concerned as we move into the next few years, into the 30s, because there does seem to be a growing, the eugenics movement is starting to get some growing attention, which is concerning, and I think it's especially concerning to Black Americans. Yes, the racial divides in the United States continue to be very strong, but on the other hand, we also have this amazing cultural renaissance going on in Harlem, and that music is spreading throughout the country. So you have this tolerance movement that is gaining ground, but then you also have these insidious, and these movements, these eugenics movements, put on such a pretty face, like, oh, it's going to be better for them if we do this, right? Very much like the British colonialism. Nyasaland is a protectorate. We're protecting them and helping them develop. So I hadn't realized it had been this bad, though. I thought it was just another British territory. But it is very much like America, the colonies, if not much worse. It is what would have happened in America had America been all black, I guess. And that I think explains a lot of what you're talking about with Miss Delaney and her denomination. So the Mission Herald, the magazine, trying to walk this strange line of surviving in a white society, yet decrying evil they consider anti-Christian. I have read, when I was preparing to come here, I did read the December 1904 and January 1905 issues of the Mission, where they were running, the Mission Herald, where they were running stories on the atrocities in the Congo that the Women's Department published. They published even photos of the victims of King Leopold's awful rubber industry. Horrible, horrible things. And it's interesting that that group of Christian missionaries very much considers it their job to decry these evils in Africa perpetrated by other white people. So that is interesting. And I know there was prayer and political action. I even read this. I read in one editorial in the 1905 edition. They were saying, the Congolese are black. Yes, these people have souls, and Jesus loves them as passionately and tenderly as he loves the proudest blue-eyed Anglo-Saxon. Made in the same image, bought by the same blood, and must appear at the same judgment bar and enjoy the same heaven or writhe in the same wrath of hell. These are the kinds of words that would make many people angry. Both enlightened scholars who despise missionaries, and the still quite prominent racial this is the environment she's growing up in. And our classmates from the Congo, the names that you've said, I recognize. I think, as I've said, Miss Flora, your wife, has told me about some of them. Well, she told me that Lena Clark loved learning what she called native singing and drumming, and she was even able to describe cannibals as friendly. And she found it amusing when the women, because body distance is very different here than there, would brush up against her and smudge red paint on her. She thought it was endearing when they gave her and the other missionaries different names, because the Okoko had difficulty pronouncing English. So Clark was born in the Congo, Flora told me, but she was highly assimilated to Western ways, of course, because that's very much where she grew up. So, and Nora Gordon, who was so excited when she was sent to a town where she would have to learn the native language in order to pray, sing, and speak in the people's own language. So these are people who are very excited about the beautiful aspects of these cultures and don't feel the need to conquer and stomp on them, which is, I think, refreshing. Yes. Flora told me about Clara Howard and how she had such affectionate and motherly descriptions of all the children that she took care of at Lukungo. So, this is essentially Miss Delaney's world, the shadows of her past as a second-class citizen in her home country, the shadows of British colonial racism, the shadows of a painfully oppressive anti-women culture here in her mission field, and it's under these shadows that she comes to Nyasaland. On her boat ride over, she overhears two French men, who of course don't think she speaks French, talking about her. Oh my. Saying there's no point in evangelism, because people of her color will only be ever good at hauling wood. Because they say that's what the Bible says in Joshua 9. I can tell you, as someone who has had to study that part of the scripture very much, and we study it in Hebrew, Joshua 9 does not say that black people will be required to haul, will be only good for hauling wood. It doesn't talk about black people. That's about ancient Israelites and the deals that were made with the Canaanites in the land, who had tricked them into not wiping them out, which has nothing to do with, it's a very different part of the world. Do these French people not know geography? All right. So, but it gets worse. The Frenchmen didn't like her evangelizing because they felt if a black person is evangelizing, it'll make people want to be paid for their work and see themselves and develop a God-man complex. What does that mean? So, in other words, they shouldn't see educated black people because that might inspire them too much. So that's the world that's on the boat over. She hears that. What a good quote from her. If Africa is to be redeemed for God and in part retained for black people, they had better bestir themselves, for the remaining 267 passengers bound for South Africa are going for the sole purpose of oppressing the natives and taking the country. And the other three, there are 3 missionaries on board, her being the only black one. my. Oh my. What a way to come to Africa the first time. So you're saying that on her final leg up the Zambezi River, one of the first things she saw was a woman eaten by a crocodile throwing her baby to safety. Oh my goodness. What a welcome to Africa. She was brave and kind to you, but homesick. She said she missed the company of civilized women. Oh my, that is very American. Oh. And she held Sunday services in the absence of the men with the help of a little boy who knew as little English as she knew Nyanga. And I assume that little boy is you. I see. Nyanga. Does that mean I've been learning the wrong language when I try to speak to you in your way? Because I've been using... This is very stressful. Oh my goodness. Why haven't you corrected me? Oh, and she was frustrated when people wouldn't adopt Western hygiene and clothes. The hygiene I understand. The clothes, it is so hot in Western clothes. And they love to read and write. In fact, it became so much. The husbands would be up late at night teaching their wives by the fire, and she couldn't sleep because of the ABCs. That is funny. That is so funny. She was a very forceful woman, and she didn't let the workers cheat her because the men weren't used to being ordered around by a woman. That doesn't surprise me. It does not seem like women give any commands here, and they don't. In the United States, also, men don't like being ordered around by women. I can tell you that from my medical training. But she'd hired them to do work. They'd begged her for work, and then now she paid them, and now they're not working. So she would have to go after them and tell them, you need to do this work. I've said to do this work. They were expecting to have a picnic, she would say. But there'd be no picnics under her. I rather think they've changed their minds ere this, she says. I see. I understand her being critical of the treatment of women here. I mean, even hearing about your sister, and then in the burial rites, women can't look into the grave except when burying a child under 4 years old. And they're forced to bury the young children because the young children would... The idea was that their disease would come get the people who are near it after it dies, and therefore better if it gets the women. Heathenism and barbarism combined is how she described doing things to ladies, to young girls, circumcisions. I would agree with her. The ceremony is 3 weeks, and she called it debauchery. Oh. Wow. In other words, other people are partying while the people are having to experience the painful training. It's not so much circumcision, it's a different form of mutilation. You don't need to describe. Well, I should know since I'm a physician. I see. I'm inclined to agree with Miss Delaney on young girls. And she would protect one of her girls from local customs. She called them her girls. I see, what a story, wow. So a woman had twins, and the other women had abandoned her. They thought she was dying, and because she had convulsions, they were going to burn her arms and leave her to die. And she did not let that happen. Oh my goodness. Why? Why is that the custom? And both Delaney and the village woman thought it was a miracle that the woman survived. And the woman was almost dying, and people tried to order her to bury the children even though she couldn't move, and she would hear no such thing and convince the others to do the deed. Good for Miss Delaney. But she was patient with them. She attributed their heartlessness to not knowing Christ rather than to any personal failing. Interesting. And no one that came to her for treatment lost a limb or a joint, so she was a nurse. I wonder how this would inspire a certain young man to perhaps go into medicine. I'm beginning to see connections between you and PIM. Obviously Chilembwe preaching there, Miss Delaney with her anti-colonialist prayers and teachings. I don't think I understand the full picture still. But it was wonderful times. Her Christmas tree is decorated with fruits and bags of goods sent by the Baptist women, and the people loved them and even skipped the local witch doctor dance poison ordeal. They skipped that to see this. Oh, what is a poison ordeal? I see. I might also skip that. How do you feel about these things being, from here? I see. And so you wanted to go to the U.S. after, and you couldn't, and Ruth couldn't. And she was heartbroken that there was nobody to stay. There was not enough money for another missionary to stay. Because she was sustained on finances from the church, because she was working full-time helping people here for free. And when she ran out, she had to return. Is that essentially? I see. And she wrote, "If Ruth does not grow up to be a great and useful woman in bringing her heathen sisters to Christ and a better way of living, I believe God will hold the Christian women of America responsible for it, because they wouldn't pay for her and her education." I see. They wouldn't pay for a replacement person to go take care of the girl, or for the girl's passage or anything like that. I see. Strong words. Very strong words. In other words, she saw it as the duty of Christian women in America to take care of people who were poor in other parts of the world. I wonder if the Rockefellers feel that way. Anyway, sorry, I don't think so. And then before leaving Africa, she was detained by authorities in Natal and kept prisoner on board her ship for 5 days. Oh my goodness. And of course, Jordan, who we've heard about, invoked the politics of respectability. He even accused U.S. officials in Natal of being complicit in the plan to humiliate an American woman traveling alone, and reported the incident to the American Secretary of State because she was not an immigrant but a first-class passenger. Oh my. And you walked 200 miles to try to follow her, but there's an ocean. Oh my goodness. So you were a young child, you were a teenager at this point. Through the leopard-infested forests, which were more infested then than now, and you slept in the trees. Oh my goodness. And then you reached the Portuguese port of Beira. Well, Portuguese is dangerous. Those were the ones who were in the 80s that Livingstone was trying to stop from all the slave trading. Which is only 40 years ago now. Or 50, because the 70s, 1870s. 1874, I believe. Yes, when the Zanzibar market was shut down, is that correct? I think we talked about this earlier. I see. This is why I have to take notes. So you persuaded a steamer captain to let you work for passage to England. You met someone in England who knew Delaney. And there you went, you managed to get... Wow. A man who knew Delaney, who had transported things for her. Alan. And he situated you on a ship bound for New York City. What a good man. But what a unlikely chance to go to another country with no money and just believe that you're going to get to the country you're trying to get to. Wow. You believed God wanted you to become a doctor, to come back and take care of your people. Wow. You were 2 days from being returned to Africa when you were on Ellis Island. Oh my goodness. But then you got a telegram through to Mother Delaney. Oh my goodness. And someone picked you up and brought you to her, and she enrolled you in Selma University in Selma, Alabama. And these are areas where you have famous black institutions. Oh my goodness. Oh no. But she was not able to return to Nyasaland. She was denied re-entry because they were afraid that Africans would identify with their better educated, politically conscious brothers and sisters. I see. There is still a great deal. How does it make you feel with all of the talk about essentially American black superiority versus African black superiority? You didn't feel treated that way. You felt that the realities of the suffering people were undergoing, that there was much to learn from the American black community, and that you were grateful. You didn't feel that there was a superiority. Because better educated does not mean better. It just means someone has received better opportunities. Well said, Doctor. So you became a medical doctor, and you and Flora, who was brought back to the United States by Clara Howard, she told me. So one of Miss Delaney's friends. Oh my goodness. So you met in the United States, I see. And you returned to destroy the mission that was to rebuild a mission that was destroyed in the 1915 uprising by John Chilembwe. And that's why you're afraid of you. You're literally here to rebuild. PIM. I didn't understand that was the history of PIM. So, do you know what actually happened that day? What? I see. So the A.L. Bruce plantation. Well, plantation, that's the same. We had those with slavery in the United States. It really is much of the same language. And the foreman, William Jervis Livingstone, was constantly mistreating the African workers. And burned down the church several times. And the British did nothing. So he's injuring and endangering people. And the last burning in 1913 just established a final enmity in Chilembwe. So he received a formal citation by legal authorities. How sweet. He got a little slap on the wrist. Oh. So what happened to John Chilembwe just finally? Snap. He didn't snap. It was planned out. He even said, let us go. What? Let us go to death in glory. Oh, something like that. Not that exactly. So he essentially was trying to be revolutionary in the way that would establish freedom from Britain much like America would have liked, or liked and unwanted. And for similar reasons, although much more serious reasons. Not just about personal property and not having occupying forces, but personal property and right of labor and the right to be treated your own, not have your things attacked violently. Oh my goodness. And then there were worse indignities after the World War because of more labor demand. So in 1915 he demanded an uprising for change. Let's strike a blow and die, he said. Isn't that what John Brown said before the Harper's Ferry raid in 1859, before the American Civil War? These things are so intertwined. Oh my goodness. I must say, I had never heard of Lynchburg, Virginia. But you know about Lynchburg, Virginia, and you're not an American. These interesting crossovers, the way that these cultures intertwine is fascinating. I must say, Britain controlling, like, all of the world, we tend to think favorably of British people in the United States. They seem to be, in some ways, more intelligent and civilized than us. They certainly ended slavery faster. But it seems that there's this great hypocrisy in having things fine and equal at home, and then across your empire, you're taking over the world. You're benevolently taking over the world, theoretically, but you're taking over the world. So he incited rebellions at 4 sites: Blantyre, Lynchburg, and the Ale Bruce plantations at Malekebu and Wanji. And they tried to capture rifles at 2 of the places. And that is where the foreman's head was removed. But women and children were protected and spared. I see. And they only killed 2 people, but they themselves were shot. I see. And what happened to Ida? She was left alone and died not soon. Not long after from influenza. Oh my goodness. Would you have been in the United States when this happened and heard this news? I'm very sorry for your loss. Have you been to his grave? No. His grave was kept a secret so that no one would come and enshrine him in any way. Oh my. So even rebuilding the mission, even though you come in peace, will be seen as a threat. Because there was no threat in someone burning down your church 3 times. I see. So, I see. And that is why you are here. But I had heard that you had some difficulty arriving. They detained you because they thought you were going to be another Chilembwe. But you were able to receive here. So you are not just a physician, but you're also the minister down there. I didn't know that. And, of course, you're an educator. Oh, my goodness. But you're building the new church again. I wish you very well. Daniel Malekebu. Have you picked out a name? I see. Yes, I would love to see pictures. That certainly, that is something that I would love. Absolutely. Let me put this book, put my book in my bag here. Yes. And I will move this plate and come over to it. I very much would like to see pictures. I very, very much would. So this is Ida Chilembwe, John's family, and they are all covering their heads. And that's you. It's a newspaper clipping. You have changed some, Doctor. So this is the newspaper. That's your little sister. What happened to her? And that's the last living picture of John Chilembwe. I think we should go outside, Doctor. It has been a long time here in this church. I think Miss Flora is waving us out to the sunshine. I see. I would like to learn more about some of these cultural things. I understand there are other medicine traditions here in Malawi, as you have called it, Malawi. Mankwala, what is that? So that's medicine. Asinkala is traditional medicine. Versus Maula, which women don't practice. Ah, which is a divination, so you wouldn't practice it either. I see. Doctor, there is something over here in your... I'm so sorry. The trees are very blustery today, and I think something is falling in your hair, sir. Let's just pick that out, the leaf. Sorry. Can't have people judging the doctor. Am I all right? Because I have to tell you, the heat just does horrible, horrible things to everything about me. I see. So much of the local plants and plant names. So your language was Nyanga, but Chewa is the most commonly spoken language here. I see. So do you know some of the herbal medicine of Malawi? You do. And so this plant here, this one that you just showed me, that's scientific name Euphorbia herda, right? We know the Western names. But it treats conjunctivitis and urethritis. It's latex, I see. And also all those terms that you told me, the Mankwala, Asinkala, those terms are Chewa terms. And those are medicine and traditional medicine. I see. And then Maula is the divination. Women don't practice it. You wouldn't practice it. Generally considered harmful or dangerous. I see. From a scientific perspective. Understood. I have noticed this about the language, that a lot of the classifications are very practical. It's about not the structure of the thing, but the use of the thing. So all edible quadrupeds are nyama, so the animal kingdom is broken up into that. Birds do have their own mbalame, and then snakes and intestinal worms have the same thing, presumably because they are harmful. Nyoka. Nosomba are fish and edible crustaceans, and Chilembwe are useless organisms. Just all the useless organisms, including useless plants. So very interesting. So it makes I understand that would make the herbal classifications interesting. So I see. So Matengo is a category of useful wild plants. I see. Well, I'm familiar with hibiscus. Hibiscus acetosella. Ah, yes. So that is used as a relish. Oh. It's like Chinese medicine. Let your food be your medicine. So you eat things that are healthy for you. That is fascinating. But you don't know much about it. Well, I'll have to learn about traditional Malawian medicine at another juncture. I would love to hear a folk tale, but if you don't have time, you don't have time. Me? Oh, well, me. Why did I come here? Well, I'm part of the Bacillus Plague Project. I'm supposed to help continue distributing kittens to the nearby villages. Yes, kittens. So that they can kill plague-bearing creatures. Yes, it's a public health program that's been developed here. And then I'm part of explaining public health education, so steaming letters is not necessary to prevent the plague. Important to control traffic instead. Those kind of things. Oh no, me personally. Not what am I here to do. Well, being a female physician in the US is complicated. Ireland is right now most open to female physicians. Scottish missions in general just want help to begin of any kind. And I'm still a woman, but I don't have to be an old fuddy-duddy in order to do my work. Women physicians, essentially, you can't dress in any way that could be considered attractive. Or no one will take you seriously in the US and Europe. So, here, obviously, the dress is quite conservative among Christians and Christian missions, but I can still wear clothes that are not, up to the neck and my hair in an awful bun, and I can still look like a woman. So, and there's less supervision on the mission field. I mean, look at Mary Slessor in Nigeria and all that she's doing for women and women's rights. She died just a few years ago, I believe. Speaking of which, what happened to Miss Delaney? She passed away in 1922 from a plague she contracted while here in Africa. So she went back and worked in Liberia when she was able to make her way back. I see. I do see that I have a lot of advantages compared to Malawian women like Sister Tuerda, and I don't take that for granted. I often get a pass for breaking taboos around women because I'm not from here in some ways. And I have obviously the protection of the missions, and I am someone that is protected and not exploited by the British, so I am aware of those things, but I still feel very unhappy about, like you said with Miss Delaney, about women here and women doing most of the work unaided, and, as Sister Tuera says, mutu umutsu suzenza denga, one head cannot hold up the roof, and it's better to have two. But I suppose that's why families like John Chilembwe's are so special, where both people are working in something together because of what they believe. I think in either country, because in the United States, it's awful. There's women's work and men's work. It's kind of the division. And are generally treated as rather frail. And so your husband will do things for you and help you with things. The issue is if you want to do the things that are considered a man's work, you're not able to because he's supposed to do those things. So I think in either country, as Sister Ida said, it would behoove us to borrow a pronunciation from the television. It would behoove us to have more women working. I think that, and choosing when to have children, all of that can help. What I'm not in favor of is this growing eugenics movement that seems to be moving towards keeping people from having children forcefully or harming a child. Yes. It's still quite hush-hush. There is a woman, Margaret Sanger, who is beginning to make waves, and she, well, I think it'll be a few years yet before anyone really listens to her, but she has been apparently meeting with, we have I'm sure you're familiar with the evil knights in white with their awful pointy hats, and she has been meeting with them to try to encourage them to find ways to spread information among Black people that will convince them to not have babies so that there will be less. And her hope is to have this spread through the churches, actually, because she sees that the Black church is such a powerful institution for change. She's hoping that they will self-destruct, which is quite awful. I had a friend who knows her, and so I've had a chance to listen to and see some of her essays and drafts before they've been published. It's a complicated thing, the issue of women and women in medicine, but in some ways it's very simple. Just let us do things, and your life will be easier as well, but also help us, and let's be equal. I agree with Sister Ida, is what I'm saying. But in the United States, it's almost a bigger issue. Well, not bigger. In American medical education, being Jewish is almost a bigger barrier right now than being a woman. So, while Jewish women are more likely to be in medicine, is my understanding, or at least in the sciences, there are a lot of, well, there's even medical school quotas to try to keep Jewish people out, which is unfortunate for us. So, growing tolerance movement, and even Americans who are racial will try to disguise their intent behind pretty words. So, I don't know how you disguise the eugenics intent behind pretty words. It's often things like, those poor people are miserable existing, we should help them not exist, or things like that. I don't know. But when it comes to Jewish people, the language has been, oh, if there's too many Jewish people in medical education, it will make people more anti-Semitic. So we're preventing anti-Semitism by being anti-Semitic. So, as you know, the Jewish people are the people group of your Jesus, right? Originally, right, from the Middle East. In the United States, actually, the first Jews were Sephardic, but now, after the World War, European immigration is radically changing the face of American Judaism. For good and for some bad. I have more Sephardic blood, but I know some Yiddish just because of we all talk. Judaism is really broken into Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox primarily in the United States by this time already. And because of the tolerance movement, which Americans are very proud of, Americans like to say, as I said, Americans like to hide their prejudices behind pretty words in general, because it is very cool to be part of the tolerance movement. So, they tend to think of anti-Semitism as a European problem. So, and in Europe, it is certainly much more aggressive, as far as every European, as far as many of the immigrants have told me, more recent immigrants. My family, as I said, is Sephardic, which is why I'm a little darker skinned. So, German capitalists will say that the communists are being controlled by Jewish people. German communists will say the capitalists are being controlled by Jewish people. And that's how they do. So, So why am I here if Jewish? So I won't answer that question outright, but I will say, while both Christian and Jewish communities have maintained stark distinctions between each other since the Roman Empire, there have always been people, like mixed race people, who had some sort of crossover. Some not mixed race, and that dates all the way back to the Jewish Talmudim under Lord Jesus. Some were something like converts, right? The first Christian missionaries to Japan were actually Jewish Catholics who were not allowed to be in other orders of Catholicism other than the Society of Jesus because of their Jewishness. And then others, so they were obviously no longer considered Jewish by many Jews, but then others, like Benjamin Disraeli, Britain's Jewish Prime Minister in the late 1800s, continued to identify strongly as Jewish throughout their lives, even though he was a believer in, I think, pretty much most of the same things that many Anglicans were believing. So we could call these people Jews in the pews. In Europe, about 80 years ago, there was even a Torah-observant congregation of these people led by Joseph Rabinowitz. And on the other hand, people like the highly respected Rabbi Isaac Lichtenstein in Hungary never renounced Orthodox Judaism, never received Christian baptism, but claimed Yeshua as the Messiah. Yeshua is the Hebrew name for Jesus. So, and you also have more modern rabbis like George Benedict in England, who became a missionary. Quite scandalous. So you have a lot of people who don't see themselves as crossing over into Christian the way those Catholic missionaries do. You have people who are walking in this, I am a Jew and I believe in a Jewish Messiah category. So that's all very scandalous. And most Jewish people don't necessarily like that. Partly most Christians don't necessarily like that, but I wouldn't say there's much aggression against those kind of people. I think it would take, certainly Christians like them, I think it would take some horrible, horrible worldwide event to hurt those people along with other Jewish people, if you know what I'm saying. Because an anti-Semite doesn't care if you are Jewish and believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. An anti-Semite cares that you are Jewish. So that's more or less, there's even a national conference of Christians and Jews that is people are talking about, I think it either just started this year or people are talking about making it. So, and some Orthodox believe that there's been straying and this will lead to judgment. People are too sexually liberal, people are not observing Torah, people are forgetting the need to return to Israel. And I can understand a lot of those things. Sexuality from a public health perspective I can certainly understand. But on the other hand, Jewish scientists are winning Nobel Prizes left and right. And the 20s are full of idea exchange. A lot of people are, in the United States, feeling very excited and you know, it's exciting that the tolerance movement has created things like this National Conference of Christians and Jews. So even for people who aren't straddling the middle or aren't mixed race, right, because there are children who are born from a Christian parent and a Jewish parent, and they may actually believe both of the things, so they may also be mixed faith, and then it depends on who's going to accept them. But, so some people are mixed race, some people are in this unique faith category, some people are like Benjamin Disraeli, and some people are just friends, like in the National Conference of Christians and Jews. So it's not that unreasonable for someone like me to be here helping the Scottish missionaries. There's certainly a lot of diversity in Jewish thought. I think Jewish people in Europe are becoming increasingly frightened because there's some changes in the situation in Europe here just as we're moving towards the 30s. It's just there. I mean, it's similar to how I feel about the kind of eugenics attitude here, and I see echoes of that in the European anti-Semitism movement. And so you do have that at the same time as you have the tolerance movement. So it's complicated being Jewish in the United States. And here, no one cares. They care more about blackness and whiteness. It is strange and sad in some ways that it's easier to be me in your country than it is to be you in your own country. In some ways, as a woman, no, that's different. Thinking about crossovers, by the way, I would love to see Lake Nyasa and the rapids. I have heard there are all kinds of lovely animals there. I've heard it's beautiful. I would like to learn more of the folk things. I hope when you and Miss Nora come over, you can tell me some folk tales. And maybe I'll try to find someone who can teach me more Malawian herbalism, because I would like to learn that. And, yes. I would like to cook fish by the river. I would like to try riding on a boat, depending on safety. I want to know and understand this beautiful place and support you if I can, in whatever limited way I can. But I think it's a beautiful thing that you are rebuilding Piaya. And I wish you much success in it. Speaking of crossovers, what do you think about the name New Jerusalem?